Okay, this is going to be short, but it is a fundamental evolution to what I understood about cultural dialectic and such. I'm pretty sure I understand the solution to the cultural dialect pretty easily, actually. It was something that's like right under my nose, and I've basically been espousing for who knows how long. And only now I realize that it is practically the solution to the cultural dialectic. Okay, so what was Marx's solution to his class dialectic, his material, whatever stuff? It's mostly something that could destroy its own fundamental basis, right? The proletarian or the lumpen proletarian, because they had the power and the self-destructive value of the class in general to undo its own class, right? Socialism would destroy the proletarian class through proletarian power and such. What they did was to continue the dialectic until the opposing one was bigger than the main thing, right? Which makes it sound like a Fichtian dialect, but in a Hegelian sense, I really don't know how to explain that, so yeah, just keep with that idea. And then, so it's a self-destructive value, right? If the dialectic is about being seen and recognized and existing through other people and such, then the self-destructive value would be opposing that and doing the exact opposite, making you seen through yourself and your people, which kind of seems like the same thing, really, but it's self-destructive because it destroys concepts in general that have been forced into the minds of people. So, while Marx uses socialism to destroy his problem of class and such, I believe the cultural dialect requires ultra-progressivism, which is different from progressivism and liberalism, because I fucking hate liberals. And moderate progressives kind of suck, because they're hypocrites, of course. Which is also one of the things on radqueerism. I have a very specific definition of radqueerism, which I'll have to explain. Um, Liberals are fundamentally fence sitters between conservatives and progressives who try to simplify, modify, moderate all the ideas down so that both sides could agree, which is why America fundamentally always has a fascist issue because the liberals are the middle ground and the Republicans aren't. One class tries to get a compromise, the other has actual goals and such. And moderate progressivism, as I've talked about in the cultural dialectic and Schelling's model, right? The model inspired by Schelling's idea of growth, decay, and new balance, where the growth would always win against the decay because it absorbs it, but not fully. It more hijacks the movement that becomes inside of it, and the movement sort of hijacks the culture, but the culture uses that to evolve. Progressivism has a tendency to be corrupted, and that's very harmful to the progressive movement because the corruption of progressivism, which is, TERFs, what's another example? Hypersexualized feminism and traditional feminism, which both go against each other and only exist to fuck up the other one. I guess you could probably say the manosphere because they were inspired by men's liberation, but then they just turned into misogynistic bullshit, which the men's liberation would probably hate so much. Men's liberation was kind of adorable though, but traditional queers, such as the moderate queers, as opposed to like rad queers and such, people who believe there's a limit and you can't be contradicting terms, even though the original LGBTQ what's it called? Movement was arranged with people who were contradicting. There was such thing as lesboys back then. Yes, there was. They're forgetting that people who literally had sexualities as genders back then and identified with things that didn't even make sense. Because it was all about identity and the fact that none of this actually matters. The LGBTQ movement was about the destruction of contradictions in identity because all of it ultimately means nothing but means everything to itself, right? It's all performative stuff that only exists in the mind and doesn't even really exist in society. Therefore, it could be whatever they want it to be. That's why they had like less boys or, um, I can't say the original term, but it was like Gabians. But they use a different word, which I don't know if I can exactly say. Or cat gender. It was made as a xenogender, but like some people did identify animals with gender back then. I just don't know if they did with cats. But cat gender is a great example. These terms aren't supposed to mean anything, just mean something to the person using them. So ultimately, traditional queerism, who limits the identities of people and tries to say you can't identify it this way or that way, or paraphobic LGBTQ people who demonize people who have their paraphilia as sexuality pride, even though by definition homosexuality was considered a paraphilia despite being labeled as homosexuality, and was very connected with pedestry. So in the end, they sabotage their own comrades. Right? Paraphilias are oppressed group who are extremely stigmatized and demonized. Paraphilias must also be liberated if any mental illness is supposed to be liberated from the stigmatization of it, which is in there for a very important thing. I still oppose the mental health industry because, well, in the end, they're pieces of shit, and barely anyone who walks out of a mental hospital has a good experience because fundamentally it is corrupt. People are ableist there. They are pretty abusive last time I checked. The drugs that they give depressed people usually tend to make their lives miserable. The drug thing in general kind of sucks, and there's no real solution, and they're basically just formed around changing people who don't fundamentally have anything wrong with them. So it's just wrong. And then with the paraphilias, well, I'm not pro contact. Neutral contact used to mean like, being near the object of paraphilia but not doing anything. Pro contact would be just like do whatever. And I'm not pro contact. I guess if you have like a lot of self control, you can be like neutral contact, I guess. Because I mean, I don't think anyone's just gonna stand around a dog and think, you know what, I can't control. It just seems unlikely. Okay, well, necrophilia, honestly, I think is kind of fine. Like you're just giving yourself STDs, and it's dead, so it's not gonna do anything. So I actually don't understand the bad thing about that. There's no sort of power issue there because one of it's dead. It's like using toys or something. I don't get the necrophilia part, but that for two, I can see how it's wrong, right? Because it's harmful. That's another thing. Progressivism has to be consistent, which is why rad queers, well, my version of rad queers, since a lot of rad queers are actually inconsistent, because moderate queers are very inconsistent about it. Paraphilia is bad, but also contradicting terms are bad. But like, just be who you are, unless it contradicts and unless it's a paraphiliac. So it's just like it's inconsistent because the definition of progressivism usually is anti-conservative action that's meant to liberate groups from oppression and progress cultural traditions and ideals to better fit the current society. You take the cultural ideals and you replace them with better ideals, and you liberate any oppressed group to be more moral, and you make sure that you don't keep any harmful traditions. Pro contact pedophilia is a harmful tradition. It was a tradition, actually. So, pro contact is traditional, and you can't really defend it because it's very reactionary. It's harmful. It goes against the definition of consistent progressivism. And I don't know how people say, oh, pro contact is so revolutionary, because fundamentally what you're doing is going against the definition of progressivism as harmless traditions that are progressive in the modern ideal of the state and separated from the culture as a whole. It's self-destructive culture, isn't it? It destroys its traditions and its values And once ultra progressivism realizes that culture itself is a harmful value, it would destroy itself. Which is why I believe it's this culture, the solution to dialectical culture, because it will destroy itself when it realizes its faults. And that's what makes it different from any other culture. I mean, dynamic culture by Marinetti didn't do shit because it doesn't fundamentally change itself. But progressive culture, ultra progressive culture, would. It would destroy itself in the second that it realizes its faults. And now to rad queers, because I think I've been saving this for long enough. Rad queer, ultra progressivism, and consistent progressivism. Um, Progressivism has to be consistent to not be corrupt by conservatism in culture, right? Because, I mean, all these movements have been inconsistent when they're more conservative, like hypersexualized feminism or traditional feminism. They've been basically hijacked. So that's why fundamentally it has to be consistent. The original term for consistent progressivism came from a pro-contact, inconsistent, quote-unquote progressive, which I don't believe is actually a consistent progressive at all, due to pro-contact being a tradition that is harmful and fundamentally needs to be destroyed. Right? So I don't believe the original creator of the consistent progressivism term is a consistent progressive. I believe I am, though, because I fundamentally understand the definition and apply that to all forms of culture and such. I consider myself an ultra progressive and even a rad queer, despite not liking transids because they are conservative and reactionary by nature. A non-transid rad queer. Trans identities or transids are the ideas that you can like be a different race or be a different affected action, i.e. stuff like transracial, trans shooter, trans victim, trans cannibal, trans Nazi. You see, these things fundamentally are reactionary by nature, right? Because it applies identity and transformation to things that are not fake at all, but real objective things, and therefore, by saying you have like trans autism, you fundamentally destroy and stigmatize autism as a whole, because it's kind of called pretending to be autistic, which is fundamentally harmful, right? Like, obviously. Or things like trans shooter, trans victim, because you're claiming something that isn't, like, objectively fake. You're just claiming to be something that has real basis in society, right? Transracial is a bit hard because race does not physically, literally exist, but it's similar to gender, but the main difference between race and everything else is that the cultural, like, appropriation of dressing as another race is kind of, you kind of have to like not do that because it is considered harmful once again, despite the fact that race technically doesn't exist. For some reason different cultures interact with each other in the huge web of bullshit that I'm not gonna assign a dialectic for because I'm tired of it. Solution: just destroy every culture. Please, problem solved. But yeah, transids are harmful because by nature they are reactionary. They equivalent identity politics to real things and objective facts, when identity is about making things that don't exist about you for yourself. So they fundamentally destroy the definition and are inconsistent. So rad queerism must leave behind the transids in order to be truly consistent with progressivism and, well, ultra progressive. I call myself a rad queer despite hating the transids. I think that's a fine definition. Oh wow, rad queer Satanist. Imagine if there was a term for this. No, but I don't identify as a Satanist. Those guys are yeah, I'm not gonna talk about them at all. But I thought it was a funny joke. But yeah, obviously the solution to cultural dialectic is older progressivism, which can be in the form of radqueerism. I just wish people actually did anything to do any revolution to bring this to justice, right? I mean, every single form of dialectic has a sort of coming revolution that apparently never gets here for some reason, right? Marx has the socialist revolution, which keeps getting hijacked and it hasn't even come yet. I'm just waiting for a real progressive movement that doesn't get corrupted, but it always does. Like, every single progressive movement, feminism, men's liberation, queer rights, black rights, always gets hijacked eventually. And now we're just left sitting here, waiting for whatever's next. But I don't know if anything will be next in the end. But at least have a solution to the cultural dialectic or the progressivism. The self-dialectic, though, the identity dialectic, never solve it. That's like the fundamental cause of insecurity. I mean, this identity dialectic exists, which I got from Lacan, by the way, which, by the way, I don't even claim I made, to be honest. It's just Lacan. Just read Lacan and you understand what I was saying there. It's just fundamentally there to create insecurity by being unsolved dialectic so we could exist in general. Solving it would just probably be dying because it exists to make us alive. Its unresolution is our drive in existence, so yeah, don't solve the identity dialectic. But the cultural dialectic, I believe I have solved. Ultra-progressivism, which also links up with socialism, because any ultra-progressivist would be a socialist. And also, probably pro-death. And fundamentally against hierarchy, because those are all progressive ideas. So, fundamentally, ultra-progressivism can help solve everything else too. And not in a Maoist way, or a stupid Khmer Rouge way, because those guys weren't real ultra-progressives at all. They wanted to fundamentally recreate a oppressive society instead of... I hate when people call futurists ultra-progressive. They weren't. Anyone who wants to recreate culture in a non-self-destructive way, anyone who wants to make a non-progressive culture, a non-self-destructive culture out of the ruins of their old culture, is not progressive, because they're not looking to destroy culture, they're looking to create a new one. And that's not our goal as ultra-progressives. Okay, that was like 17 minutes. What else was I going to talk about? I actually wrote a note on this, so I can actually look back now. Yes, self-destructivity is the solution to dialectics, usually. That is its main thing. So, I guess that's all I have to say, really. Progressivism is the best ideal we have in this world, and I hate reactionaries. That's it.